name's Chris, and I'm here to talk about some books, whether anybody watches it or not. Fallen back in love with reading, and I've been kind of devouring an awful lot of content, both on YouTube and also devouring an awful lot of content in terms of books. So, I'm here to share what I've been reading over the past month or so. And I'll start with a series that kind of was what got me back into reading. And that is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. Now, I had finished Leviathan Wakes a while ago, and I love the two-handed nature of Leviathan Wakes between Holden and Miller, and the fact that it was quite brave to have just two characters be the highlight of the story as they pass the story backwards and forwards through the whole story. So come to the second book, Caliban's War, and you're left with more characters to be introduced. And actually, well, in film terms, this is the difficult second movie. This is the difficult second novel, because they mess with the formula a little bit. They have more characters: Bobby, Avasarala, Holden. You know, there are more people to pass this about, and I can see why an awful lot of people might fall off the wagon with this book. But I mean, any book that introduces Christian Avasarala in just can't help but be bloody phenomenal. I mean, she's just one of the greatest characters that I can think of, both on screen and in the book. She's probably even better in the book. I absolutely love this. You can probably see it behind me. I've got book 3 there ready, step up, ready to go. And you know, the story, the developing story of another place that's been affected by the events that are emerging in the system and the world of the Expanse. If you know the world of the Expanse, you know that they spend an awful lot of time building the world and building the mythology and the changing mythology so of the world as they go along, and there's an awful lot of time and energy invested into doing that, but while still being a very character focused story. So character focused, in fact, that they name each chapter very much who is the centre and whose viewpoint and whose internal monologue you will be represented with in that bit. So yes, loving the Expanse. Can't really get enough of it, but I don't want it to totally dominate all that I'm watching and all that I'm seeing. So I'm trying to divvy it up. There are 9 books. There is the short story collection as well, Memories Legion, which I don't know where to insert it in. I know some of the stories that are in there because they were dramatised in the TV series, some of them which was great. But yeah, Caliban's War, solid Expanse recommendation. Which brought me on to, you know, one part of James S.A. Corey is Daniel Abraham, and Daniel Abraham is in a number of books, and he has a recent book out, which is book 1 of the Kithamar trilogy, which is Age of Aish. Now, Age of Aish has received sort of mixed response. I expected to like it because I do like the prose and writing style and the world building that happens in the Expanse, but in a fantasy setting, and not having read Long Price Quartet or The Dagger and the Coin, I expected to like it, but given the kind of feedback that I've been getting from other people, I wasn't sure whether it would totally land. And you know, I do understand some of the criticism of the Age of Aish, in how it goes about building its world and how it sets out its characters, but the premise is fascinating. They basically have this story set in about a world which is very much a class-based world, where you have lower class, middle class, upper class, and people that rule the world. So you've got a changing of the guard in the upper class, so royalty is passing from one death to another. There is a middle class of the working people, and then you have the very low class. And our two main characters are Samish and Alice, both come from this lower class. Now I'll come back to that in a second, because there's a lot I think to say about this. In fact, there's so much to say, I might do a separate review video. But essentially we have their story. They're very much street urchins. They're just trying to get by day to day and trying to do odd jobs to try and get enough food for shelter, or enough money for food and shelter, and to repeat that every day. That's kind of what their existence is. And Alice has a relationship in her family that's kind of a bit mixed. She has a mother who she really has no time for, and a brother who she idolises, and brief spoilers at the start, her brother dies, and that becomes the drive for her to find out who did it and get to the bottom of it and punish the people that are responsible for his death, and also to find out what he was up to. Samish has got this unrequited love for Alice, the character, and she's determined to look after Alice and make sure that she's doing things right. And for a bit in the middle, after it does that setup, the book drifts a bit. I think setting up the world, certainly setting up the motivations of the characters, but not in a way that necessarily develops the characters. The characters stay kind of stagnant for, I'd say, for about 150 pages or 100 pages of this, where they are who they are. Some people say they're unlikable during this period. I mean, I think that's fair. I think they're set up to be like that because they're the very bottom feeders who are really only concerned in their day-to-day life with food and shelter, and therefore haven't got the space to develop and think deeper. We, as the reader, look at them and go, God, what are you doing that for, or otherwise? But I think it does pay off further down the line, and I think that there only is a slight hint of magic and mysticism through this book, but there are enough interesting characters and enough events that it sets up the next couple of books very well, because Age of Ice is about telling the same story 3 times from different perspectives, so I don't really expect to see much of Alice after this except in reference. I think we'll get new viewpoints, and one of the fun aspects of Age of Ice is going to be, well, can we surmise whose perspective we'll get the next story from and who'll be the next one? And I think if you're going to do a story like that, and this is the bit that I think is missed about this, and I'm proved to be wrong, whatever, I think if you're going to tell a multi-layered story like that, you have to tell it from the very bottom first and then make your way up, because the people at the bottom are less aware of what's going on than the people at the big overarching thing that's going on, and by the time that's all knitted together for you as the reader, I think this will even be better than what it is. I really enjoyed it. The last 150 pages or so absolutely flew by for me, and I divulged this in a couple of days. It just kind of disappeared on me, and I really enjoyed the characters. I mean, I think Samish as a character is just wonderful. I think the way her thoughts are portrayed, the way her attitudes mould and change with circumstances, I think's really lovely. And certainly slow middle, but I think you get the payoff at the end, and the world only grows and gets more interesting as that time goes on. So Age of Ice, 4 stars for me if I'm being harsh, but more of a 4.5 stars. I really did enjoy it, but I think there's so much more to come from the series. Next up is, well, one of the greats of fantasy for many people, and a book that I had started on audiobook a few times before I kind of got back into reading it, is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. The first book of the Mistborn series. A lot of people have read it, a lot of people love it, and I really struggled with the audiobook. It was dragging. I mean, I'd been listening to the Dresden Files in audiobook for years, loved it. You know, James Marsters being this person that I can't imagine not watching or not listening to them do High Dresden. And like I say, nothing against necessarily the narrator of the Mistborn audiobooks, but I think for me, and other people may do this differently depending how you do it, when you're driving in the car and commuting, the drifting off, I don't think you get as good a sense of world building as you do from reading the book. So I got to chapter 14 or something, and I was like, right, I need to pick up the book. And nearly as soon as I picked up the book and started into it, I read chapters 12, 13, etc. to get me through, because I felt like I'd missed an awful lot. I was in love. The world building and the characters, especially Vin, Kelsier, Sayzed, everybody is just so interesting. But more so than that, my favourite part of it is the game of the houses, so to speak. So the political intrigue that goes between the young nobles in that world, and how they play off against each other. It was very reminiscent of one of my favourite book series at the time that I know many people are getting into, the Empire series by Gianni Wirtz and Raymond D. Feist. That's one of my favourite books of all time, or series of books, and this was very reminiscent of it. And by the time I got to the last 200 pages, I just could not put it down. I mean, it was just one of those things that every time I thought I had it figured out, it would throw something else at me. It was changing every 10 pages, every 15 pages, so with something else being thrown on it. And I know that's a hallmark of Sanderson's writing in general. The only other thing I've read of Sanderson's is the Reckoner series, which I really, really enjoyed. But fantastic. I just thought this was phenomenally good. Now, I don't think his prose is out of this world fantastic, but his ability to tell a story, I think, is. For that reason, we've got Well of Ascension up there. I'm looking forward to keeping on going with Final Empire. A 5-star for me. Which takes me on to the Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. And this is a very celebrated sci-fi novel. Now, I kind of thought this was right up my street. I thought, there's a lot of high concept science fiction in here, a lot of big ideas. And I thought, as somebody who is a maths teacher and somebody that loves that world, that it'd be right in my wheelhouse. And certainly the first 150 pages are just full of big ideas. They keep on coming at you chapter after chapter after chapter. And I kind of bet that up. I love the big ideas. That's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed short stories, for instance, for the past while. I'm in the middle of short story collections at the moment, and I love that. But it bounced between characters quite an awful lot, and so it was hard to get a bit of rhythm in it. Now, and I think if I do have a problem with the three-body problem, it's to do with my expectations. I kind of thought it was going to be high concept sci-fi the whole way through, but they throw another element into it that I just felt cheapened an awful lot of the big ideas that are in the three-body problem. I loved the use of how they use VR to explain what the three-body problem was. I thought that was really clever. I thought that was really inventive, as they took you every time you stepped inside the VR machine, of turning the problem another way and kind of explaining it. I thought it was really, really good use of that. How the thing broke down after it felt a bit, I'd say the last 200 pages felt a bit damn brownish. I know that's a bit of an insult in some ways, but it felt like it was kind of that taking things that are smart and are puzzle solving or otherwise, and then throwing this kind of weird narrative over the top of them that really didn't need to be there. Having said all that, I mean, I'd continue on with the series. I mean, it's a 3.5-star book, I'd say, something like that, for the three-body problem. So I did enjoy it. I think my expectations were that it was going to be somewhere else. It was going to go that bit higher, and it didn't actually happen that way. And then I read book 1 of the Sun Eater series, Empire of Silence. It's part of a read along in Shelf Space and Sarah Reed's Discord as well, and I kind of got involved in that. That was good to see. And I read Empire of Silence now. Empire of Silence it's a 4-star book for me. I'm going to put that right out there. I think its back half is real strong. It sets up the future books to the point that I can't wait for Howland Dark. I think the first half is so disjointed. I think we have characters coming in and out of those first 300 pages, and it's hard to get attached to anybody because they're never around for very long to get attached to. You've got the central character of Hadrian, who is a noble who wants to disavow his nobleness when he finds out he's not going to be her, and he bounces from place to place, location to location. And my world building in my head, I'm a reader who builds worlds, not characters necessarily. I don't see characters, I see their locale and their location. And it was only when that settled down in the second half of the book, and I could kind of build that around myself, and the characters stayed who they were. We had a solid cast, that I really thought, okay, we're on to a winner here. I think once that happened, I think it was a great book. I think there's so many great ideas in it. I like the kind of mix, the sci-fi, but with the soft fantasy element that goes with it. Some of the tropes and themes are very common to an awful lot of books, but I'm really excited to see where that goes next. And then I'll finish off with, a rediscovery of sorts, and that is Stephen King. I used to read quite a lot of Stephen King when I was late teens, 20s. Read it, Red Stand. Stand's probably my favourite. Needful Things, Cujo. I mean, the list goes on. And I'd kind of forgotten what was so great about Stephen King. But I'll start with this short story, which is 1922. I mean, these re-release of these little novellas that have just been released, this new Rainbow collection by Hodder and Stoughton. I'm a sucker for it. Can't help but. 1922 is the story of a man and the son who lives in one who murder the wife. And I mean, it's so gruesome at the start. I mean, that's the setup for the book. It's the setup for what's going to happen, and it's nearly a cautionary tale in why you should and why you shouldn't do it, and actually how it haunts you, and that kind of stuff. And unlike most other Stephen King novels, I think this short story is particularly a bit different, because I would say King is a master, master of horror people call him, but I always think his books and his writing create just an unsettled atmosphere the whole way through. Just complete. You always get lots of internal monologue. You get lots of, looking into the mind of a person that's crazy or a mind that's deranged, and kind of he does that amazing. He creates that character. It gets you to feel some compassion and sorrow for them, which was a struggle at the start of this book for sure. But then twist it and then move the story along progression. I think it's a great novella. Like, did it in one sitting, even though it's about 150 pages or something like that. But the whale, the rats, the bodies, how it all resolves, I think it's a great novella. I'm not necessarily going to rate it other than say it's a strong recommendation. And Stephen King was a really good introduction to getting back into Stephen King and how he writes such great idiosyncratic characters. But brings me on to my final book. Now, I'll almost certainly do a review for this separately, because this is a book and a copy of a book. As you can see, it's a bit tattered and a bit bruised. This has survived multiple moves through houses. It's fallen off shelves. You can see rips, etc. there. It's a bit broken. This is Duma Key. And Duma Key, I kind of got this as a book club edition from when it was out in about 2008 or whatever it was, and I never read it. And I picked it up off the shelf. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's one of my favourite Stephen King novels. And the book being a bit tattered and a bit broken kind of fits the theme, because that's what the book's about. It's about people who are broken and a bit tattered and are trying to mend themselves and piece themselves together again. We have a central character, Edgar Fremantle, who has lost his arm in an accident, but he was a very wealthy man. He had a construction business and he wasn't struggling for money or otherwise, but he needed to rebuild himself, both in terms of physically but also mentally. His speech is challenged, his trouble expressing himself, and he needed to see what else he could do with his life and create himself. So he decided to move himself to one of the Florida Keys, Duma Key as it is, and see if he could move into a house which he called the Big Pink, which is a character in and of itself, because the movement of the sea, the shells under the house, create an eerie and unsettling atmosphere, just like I talked about with Stephen King. And it's while he's here that he meets some other characters, primarily the character of, who's almost certainly called Wireman, but I just, in my head when I read him, it's Wireman. I think it gives him an extra bit of sass flair and interest. And Wireman's an interesting character because he's fairly straightforward as a King character. He's a very positive influence on Edgar, as all the weird stuff that happens to him goes along, and as he finds what is his new love and his therapy, which is art. So drawing, sketching, painting. And the book investigates how his art starts to peel out in the rest of the world, and actually whether that's affected by him as a person recovering, the location that he's in, or the people around him. And there's this great mystery that builds in Duma Key. And it's a mystery that you, the reader, will postulate as to whether that's responsible. You don't really know. You kind of put it all together for yourself and you go, oh, I need to know more. And like a lot of King books for me, when I read them, they start off being slow reads and then they reach a point and they are impossible to put down. And Duma Key definitely falls into that category for me. It's another 5-star read for me. I absolutely loved it. One of the things that I will say about it is, and I'll say about King in general, I think he often fumbles the endings of his books. I think it suffers very badly towards the end. as many of them do. But this one, I think it's so well written, he could have ended it in about 4 or 5 different places. There were a couple of places that I kind of thought, oh, this book feels over, but there's another 200 pages to go. What's he going to do for the rest of it? And the relationships that Fremantle has with the people around him, the people that are close to him, his family, his ex-wife, his daughters, the people that are there to help him, Wirraman, the old lady, they are all fantastic and really well fleshed out characters. I don't think you're left in any doubt by the end of people's motivations and who they are as people. Both they're good and they're bad. People have dark sides and light sides and bright sides, etc. And I think Duma Key is right up there with Stephen King novels to be read. So that is my wrap up of March. A lot of reading done for me this month, mainly because I was off work for a long period, and I shall continue on my Stephen King train with a couple of other things that are in the pipeline. Next month I'll do a TBR video for that, I think, as well. So if you've seen this video, if anybody managed to see this video, I'd like to know what you think. This is my kind of first real foray into doing book content. I did my Man in the High Castle video many while ago, but without really thinking that. I knew that was going to be a one-off, but I thought, you know, I want to do, and I'm getting a lot of joy out of my reading at the moment. I'm really enjoying everybody's content that's there. So if you've enjoyed this video, and made it through to the end, thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. All the best.